We're going to start with some findings from the report that you have on those thumb drives, and then we're going to hear from organizers and various campaigns talk about their strategies, challenges and strategies of organizing black workers. I won't spend a lot of time introducing our amazing panel because you can Google them. But just to start, we have Lola Smallwood-Cuevas, who is the founding director of the LA Black Worker Center. Jennifer Epps Addison, as you have seen her picture on the cover of those reports, who's executive director of Wisconsin Jobs Now. Mark Meinster, who's the campaign director of the Warehouse Workers for Justice. Bishop Dwayne Royster, executive director of POWER, Philadelphians Organized to Witness, Empower, and Rebuild. And of course, last but not least, although we'll start with him first, is Sean Thomas Brightfield, co-director of the Movement Building Project and the lead author of Black Workers Matter. And we'll start with Sean and just come down towards me for, you know your time limits. I'm going to be keeping time on all of you, and so that we can get to discussion and really get some engagement with all of you. So Sean, please.
Sure. So hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Just wanted to start with a little bit of a personal intro since it is International Workers' Day. So my grandfather was a member of the Transit Workers Union. He ran I don't know if you run a subway station, but I have my vision of my grandfather running a subway station in East Harlem, where my grandparents and my mother was raised. So, I think for me growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a very strong, we went to competing high schools, union town, I think that this is an important day to be having this conversation, and it feels really great. I want to talk a little bit about the report and sort of where it came out of. So the idea for the report actually had come together a few years ago. So as Susan mentioned, the Discount Foundation had been investing in a set of organizations that were largely African American organizing groups. And so the decision of the foundation to move from a frame of structural unemployment to calling that funding priority Black worker organizing was significant for the foundation and for the foundation itself and other funders as well. And a number of us ended up being at a meeting of the first conference of this, the State of Black Workers in America conference. And so there was this conversation that was happening about sort of what is this emerging field that's coming together. And so out of that conference, I think there were certainly a lot of relationships that were built, and people were seeing commonalities in terms of the work that they were doing, some of the struggles that people were facing as well. And so the idea of doing this report to sort of put this emerging field of organizing on the map, I really think came out of that meeting 2 years ago. And so excited to be at the point of putting this report out there. I want to give a sense of the full report because my section on the organizational landscape is just one of 5. So there are also sections, so Linda Burnham, who was here earlier from the National Domestic Workers Alliance, has a section about the intersection of race, gender, and low-wage work. Stephen Pitts from the UC Berkeley Labor Center, who also is sort of the lead TA and sort of advisor for the National Black Worker Center project, trying to build the Black Worker Center movement nationally. He provides a great analysis of just how, unfortunately, bleak the economic situation is for many black workers and why we're not going to be able to train our way out of the problem. Algernon Austin has a piece about the connections between the permanent recession in black communities and the problems of poverty, education divide, things like that. And Mark Bayard, who we have to again thank for organizing this conference. In addition to Still I Rise, and organizing this conference, he also wrote a piece in that report, Black Workers Matter report, about the potential of partnership between black workers and the labor movement. So I just know that since it's on a thumb drive, people haven't had a chance to thumb through the report, so I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. So in terms of the section of the report that is about the organizational landscape, it's based on a set of interviews that I had with these great, amazing organizers here, as well as an additional probably 25 organizations, many people who are in the room. And so The conversations were really interesting. The organizing and the organizational priorities did run the gamut, and that's not surprising because the crisis, the economic crisis facing our communities is so severe that there's no shortage of angles to take. And I think that the different organizing models really reflect the multifaceted ways that tackling the problem of Black jobs, Black employment gap and low-wage workers, the people are stuck in low-wage jobs. There are so many angles to take, and the organizations are trying to address it from multiple angles and through multiple issue lenses. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the main policy buckets that I identified from the interviews, and so the rest of the panel will have certainly campaign examples that reflect those issues. But first was about raising the sort of floor for wages. So a lot of work around minimum wage campaigns, a lot of work connected to the Fight for 15. So that was certainly one of the significant policy priorities. Another policy priority was around ensuring that local development actually creates jobs in our communities. And so you'll hear some work about those kinds of campaigns. And then a third piece was around the particular barriers that people face if they have a criminal record. And so ban the box campaigns were another significant policy theme across the interviews. And I want to talk a little bit about ban the box campaigns because I think that it illustrates one of the broader challenges for the field, which is the narrative challenge, right? So D'Angelo is here, I believe. Okay, so D'Angelo, when I interviewed him, he talked about the Ban the Box campaign that the Workers Center for Racial Justice in Chicago won. So this is a campaign that they won. And part of what he reflected to me was that there was a little bit of a trade-off that had to be made to win the campaign, which was to de-race the analysis and the critique of these policies that prevent people who have criminal records from having as much access to employment. And so I thought that it was an important thing to lift up because it's a challenge that organizations are facing across the various issues. And it speaks to what other people have already talked about, that there is this real problem of anti-Black racism not being able to be called out. And so the narrative challenge is both one of will and sort of building the public will, but it's also a research challenge. There actually is work that could be done to figure out and craft narratives that will be more convincing and more compelling. And I know that the center did a lot of that work for the new campaign that was launched, but we also need more of that to happen across a variety of issues and across a variety of organizations and local and regional sort of groupings, because what might work in a Washington, D.C. based campaign may not work in a campaign that's based in Mississippi, for instance. And so that was one of the sort of significant findings that I did want to lift up, and I wanted to just connect it to something that Martin Luther King said about leaders are molders of consensus, not searchers of consensus. And I think part of, it's a great lofty sentiment, but there is also a very practical reality of the organizational constraints that organizations, particularly Black-led organizations, particularly organizations that are organizing Black workers, are facing, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can be a sort of leader who is trying to be a molder of consensus when there is flexibility in terms of your funding and organizational stability. And when that is not the case, there are going to be much harder choices that people have to make. And so it's not just a research or a leadership challenge that the field is facing to be able to put out a narrative that actually reflects the sort of the reality of anti-Black racism and challenges it. It is also going to be a resource question. And so I just wanted to put that out as the starting point because I do think the narrative challenge is one that's going to come up many times.
Thank you, Sean. Lola.
Thank you, Dorian, and thank you, Sean, for this amazing report, and to all of the other authors and to the conveners of this amazing conference, Mark especially, and for Susan for all of her help and leadership, Lainey Romero and others. Just want to say it just feels good to be here. And at the second State of Black Worker Conference and to have this conversation. I'm Lola Smallwood-Cuevas, and I am founder and chair of the coordinating committee of the Los Angeles Black Workers Center. I am also on the executive committee of the National Black Worker Center Network, and we mentioned Brother D'Angelo. He's my brother in Chicago at the Chicago Center for Racial Justice. We also have the Bay Area Black Worker Center and the Baltimore Black Worker Center, and 4 other planning committees in cities across the country. So the movement is growing, the movement to not just live in the pain and the suffering of the Black jobs crisis that is every day claiming the lives of our families and tearing at the fabric of our community, but to live in the possibility and in solutions. And at the Black Worker Center, we do a lot of visioning. We talk a lot about the community that we want to see. This morning I feel like, or this afternoon, I think it's just important to have some reflection and some reverence and to really call into the room. And I want folks to sort of do this with me, sort of close your eyes and think about Freddie Gray. Think about Walter Scott. Think about Mike Brown, Tanisha Anderson, Ezell Ford, Alicia Thomas, Brother Africa, our most recent victim in Los Angeles. And think about these brothers and sisters, not in the way that we have seen them, in the brutal way that their lives have been taken, but let's think about them standing together. We like to think about them maybe wearing hard hats, having their boots and tools, thinking about them with their lunch boxes in their hands, maybe walking together toward a job site to build their communities and to build their lives. Let's just sit with that for a minute. And then as we let that vision sort of move out of our minds, let's think about this statistic. $142,000 versus $11,000. This is the median income gap between white family income and Black family income, $142,000 versus $11,000. So for the Black Worker Center, we're living between these two visions, right? We're trying to see, how do we bridge these two visions? How do we not just have the vision, but dream and fight for a city, a Los Angeles, a community that can have decent jobs, where people can take care of their families, where they can be treated with respect as human beings and be seen as human beings, and really resist and contest this Black jobs crisis that is a form of economic violence that goes unseen every day in this country. Unseen every day. And our families are suffering and they're fighting through this. How do we really see that this is that level of poverty that is dehumanizing our folks and allows the police to come into our community and take the lives of our sons and our daughters? And so for the Black Worker Center, we are an economic justice organization. We are a grassroots research organization, but we're committed to the life and the living of Black families in their communities, because when Black workers do well, our communities do well. The center established, we're 4 years old now, and our purpose was really, how do we create access to quality jobs in our community? How do we deal with employment discrimination and employer bias that excludes our folks from key jobs? But also, how do we transfer the really crappy jobs that Black workers are doing? And in LA County, over 50% of Black working age adults are either unemployed, 20% when you factor in discouraged workers, and 32% of our folks are working in jobs that are paying $13 an hour or less. So this crisis is real. And our strategy is simple: build power. Because this is not a new crisis. It didn't happen in 2008. This is a compounded, deep crisis that we're living through, the same poverty that came after emancipation and has been compounded by regressive policies that have now created across every community an economy that does not work. But for Black workers, it is working at a level that is genocidal and that America needs to listen and pay attention to. And so our main focus is power building in our community, building authentic Black leadership and Black voices, hearing what are the real barriers and taking those stories and crafting and giving facilitation of research that helps to create new strategies and solutions that attack those barriers head on. And then we need the power to actually make it happen. Because it's not enough to think about what the policy and to hand this off to elected officials. We have to hold everyone accountable to what we want to do and what we believe. And so I know my time, and I know Dorian's going to start flashing me. So I want to just sort of talk a little bit about our work, a little bit about some of the victories that we've had in Los Angeles. In 2012, the Black Worker Center was part of a historic agreement in which the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transit Authority adopted the first ever project labor agreement, which is an agreement between unions and the agency, and a local, targeted hire agreement. Now it's local with the help of Congresswoman Bass and others, that we can have local hiring on these projects that happened this year. And it's the first policy that included very, very distinct language around diversity. In an anti-affirmative action state, we were able to use and move the DOL to be active in this campaign so that we could use federal affirmative action language and put it in the PLA. And we also fought for stronger disadvantage criteria, because in 2008, 9, 10, everybody was disadvantaged. But there are some people, as we see in what we're calling a recovery now, that will remain disadvantaged in good times. And so we wanted to make sure that this policy worked for those people who happen to look like me and many of the folks here in this room. And so before I talk, about sort of the victory, I want to sort of go back 2 years of how we got there. And as we were preparing for this investment of $70 billion to build about 15 rail lines in Los Angeles, we knew that organizing Black construction workers were going to be critical. And it was in the organizing of Black workers and the stories that it wasn't just about having a PLA with local hire. That there were real barriers, and we know historic barriers in the construction industry that we needed to address. And so the issue of workers being able to have access to job sites, the issues of barriers of being able to get access to training. We knew these were very real. And also the issue of having political will and an expectation for real diversity that included Black workers. And so we formed, as our first step, we knew that we needed to talk to the unions. And so we had an inside-out strategy where we began to organize Black men and women who made it into the construction trades and who held office in those unions, who were maybe some of the first staff in those unions. And it was a very small table, but we mapped out the region and we brought over 8 building trades, the largest, to the table, those representatives, and we formed the Black Labor Construction Council. And it was that council that helped us to develop, how do we begin to negotiate and talk to the building trades about this? Trades that have historically excluded Black workers. How do we actually talk to them about the crisis in the Black community and why the community needs to be out front demanding this policy, but we have to show them that they can see themselves in the policy. And so it was the voices, the power, and the courage of these brothers and the organizing of them that allowed us to do a series of conversations with these very male and stale building and construction trades leaders, and allowed us to be able to craft and to negotiate and to be able to negotiate with them to be neutral as we push for these policies. Additionally, we did things like, we talked to unemployed construction workers, pre-apprentices. And I think about a young man like our member, Andre Hollins. Andre was a 26-year-old construction worker. He had been gone through every pre-apprenticeship program. He had a booklet of certifications, and he could not get to a project, get to a job. And in organizing and working with Andre, he told us stories of how he would go to job sites 4 in the morning trying to get work, how the contractor sometimes would even call the police on him, like, what is this young black man doing out here at 4 a.m., would never take his resume. He was about to give up on his dream of becoming a carpenter, and he was referred to the Black Worker Center. And by coming into the Worker Center, meeting African American men and women in the trades, learning how jobs get created, finding and hearing his voice, he was able to tell his stories about what were the barriers facing him. And he told those stories to decision makers. He told those stories to the agency. He told those stories to anyone who would listen as part of a team of construction workers who advocated and pushed for more progressive policies. And in the end, it was his voice and the voice of him and probably about 80 other workers who participated in hearings, who participated in interviews, who helped to shape and move this policy that allowed us to see this victory and to see these 3 important elements be part of this historic PLA, which is now a national model. And now I also want to say that Andre has been employed now for over 2 years, getting his first job on the Metro, and now he's building dorms at the local university. So I say this to say that we can make a difference in some of the hardest industries where there is a real career and opportunity. And we can do it not just by passing policy, but doing what our members said, like monitoring, We began to develop a community monitoring program. We meet every other month with the contractor and the agency to track workforce numbers. We also, through Strategies for Diversity Implementation Agreement, we have the opportunity to go for the first time, workers and community, to be in the pre-jobs meetings where the agencies and the contractors are talking about the bids before they get released and educating bidding contractors on what they need to do in terms of being in compliance for diversity components of the PLA, but also the community expectation, and that we are all watching and monitoring these projects. I will say that the work has resulted already in the benefits. The very first project that came out under this PLA for the first time has 20% Black workers building the Crenshaw rail line, which runs right through the heart of our community. And this is up from 3% when we started to evaluate the success of these policies in the past. So this co-enforcement model, this advocacy, the sustained pressure and power does make a difference. I want to just close with a sister, Ladea Epps, because it's about the brothers and the sisters in our community being able to access jobs. Ladea was invited to be with the First Lady at the White House because she was one of the first to get onto the PLA project on Crenshaw because of our advocacy and work. She had been working at part-time jobs, working for Walmart, and she's like, I want a quality job, want a quality career. 5'3", 110 pounds, soaking wet. But she went and we referred her over to the laborers boot camp. We talked to her every day. Mentors were cheering her on. She was crying because they were hazing and putting it on, trying to get her to quit. But she did not give up. And now she is one of 3 Black women building the Crenshaw line, which is historic in itself to have 3 women, let alone 3 Black women, helping to build the community. So we need support to continue this work, to scale this work, to make a difference. I want to talk more about our work around wage theft and how we're using wage theft as a way to enforce anti-discrimination laws, but I know I'm out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lola. Bishop Oyster.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Warren and Dr. Bayard and Susan for the opportunity to be here today and to share a little bit about our work. My name is Dwayne Royster, Bishop Dwayne Royster. I'm the Executive Director of POWER, Philadelphians Organized to Witness, Empower, and Rebuild. We're a 41 congregation, faith-based organizing movement committed to racial and economic justice in the city of Philadelphia. We represent about 36,000 families across the city of Philadelphia, working to build power to change the damned world. We're just starting in Philadelphia. To really, and I mean, for the next year at least, in terms of our world sphere, Philadelphia is the center of the universe, both with the Pope coming and also with the DNC convention. I do want to say something about the Pope coming for a minute before I get too far into this, because I think there's a way, and I was just talking to Sean about this a little bit earlier, that we have done a disservice to disconnect the faith community from work with labor. In particular in the African American community. The strongest organizing in this country came when faith and labor walked hand in hand, and we didn't have a rent-a-collar mentality, but it was really faith leaders, labor leaders, community leaders that were really walking together to be able to create change in this country. Just yesterday, Power is a part of both the Partnership for Working Families and the PICO National Network, and the head of the Cardinals Conference for Pope Francis was in Philadelphia at the invitation of the PICO National Network. We had 270 Catholic leaders sitting with the Cardinal because the Pope's coming to the U.S. and he's coming to Philly, then he's going to D.C. and he's going to New York. Part of the thing that we spent our time with the Cardinal yesterday, and we were with him for 9 hours, 200 leaders, workers from the airport and other places around Philadelphia. We said to the Cardinal very clearly, one, the Pope must come here and address the issue of racism. And the Pope must understand that if you want to talk about economic justice, you cannot talk about it separate from racial justice simultaneously. Part of the time that we had been together, Dr. Stephen Ray from Garrett Evangelical School of Theology, a professor of systematic theology there, who also happens to be an economist, said, you must understand that there's a direct correlation in this country and the economy of a link between the wealthiest, the economy improves based on the misery of dark bodies. It was phenomenal understanding that when we take a look at the economy, and especially how it's laid out right now, the more misery is inflicted upon dark bodies in this country, the more white folk make money. And so it was a really powerful piece to be able to convey that and to know, as we were talking to the Cardinal, the first thing out of his mouth was that he understood that there is a link between racial and economic justice in this country that cannot be de-linked from each other if we want to create change. So that goes a little bit to talk about why I want to talk about power. So this faith-based organizing movement, broad-based, part of the PICO National Network, part of the Partnership for Working Families. When we launched, we're only a 4-year-old organization, but God's blessed us. We've been able to grow significantly and very quickly and really grow in power in Philadelphia as well. But part of the issue that we were launching with when we first launched was the fact that there was going to be a $6 billion expansion at the Philadelphia airport. And at the height of the economic crisis, we looked and said, wow, this is fantastic. 45,000 construction jobs, and y'all know what that means for black folk in construction jobs, right? We're going to have to do some work. But then there were also 3,000 permanent service worker jobs that were going to be created with this as well. We started digging into it. We're talking to the workers, relating to them. We actually brought 2 unions together that had really bad relationship in Philadelphia and said, look, we've got to work together on this at the airport. But we started digging in with the service workers and really found out that the airport is really the biggest plantation in the country. And when we began to discover that there were workers at the airport on subcontracts that were making $3 to $5 an hour in tip positions, weren't allowed to ask for tips, but their companies were telling them that they had to post that they had tips because their paychecks have to show that they were making the minimum wage, talking about wage theft. So we kind of jumped into this foray. These are the people that were baggage handlers. These are the folk that were the wheelchair attendants that were pushing. There were concession workers that were at the airport. And we started jumping into this. And although we got into a big argument with the Building Trades Organization, they're still not really happy with us in Philly about the construction jobs. We started looking at these service jobs and saying, whoa, 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 there's a problem here. Philadelphia, the airport in Philadelphia is wholly owned by the city of Philadelphia, right? So, and Philadelphia has a law that says if you are in contract with the city of Philadelphia, either at the general contract level or the subcontract level, to the nth degree, you must pay your employees a minimum of 150% of the federal or state minimum wage, whichever is higher, plus benefits. So we're like, hey, this is great. So we go to see the mayor and we say, Mr. Mayor, the law that you wrote when you were a council person says that these people should be paid $10.80 an hour. They're only getting $3.50, $4 an hour. Now, we thought maybe the mayor, it's a big city, 1.6 million people. It's the 5th largest city in the country, largest chocolate city on the East Coast, that, we're going to the mayor, who happens to be African-American, and say to Mr. Mayor, these workers at the airport, 70% of which are black women, who are really, a lot of single moms, you're going to want to do something about this issue. He comes back to us and says there's a one-word and in this particular document, and we don't interpret it applying to subcontracted workers. So we had these meetings with the mayor. It was absolutely disastrous. But at the time we were young, we didn't really have a lot of power. We were still trying to find our way. So we actually even took our union partners in with us. That made it worse. So we said, okay, back up, new strategy. We're going to go after city council. So we went after city council, and there's one councilman, African-American councilman, the airport is in his district. He's responsible for the transportation and utilities. And we said, look, there's another way to go after this. Actually U.S. Airways at the time. U.S. Airways has their hub in Philadelphia. They have 70% of the gates in the city. The subcontracted workers all work for them. And so we said, let's go change the lease for U.S. Airways. And so we're like, this can't be that complicated, right? So we go to councilman, we start working the whole 9 yards. U.S. Airways finds out what we're talking about. They send in 10 lobbyists into the city of Philadelphia, and they begin this campaign to work against us. Everything was going good. We had the councilman lined up. He was going to introduce this legislation. There was a lease extension. They were going to modify the lease for us so that we would get first source hiring. We got that from LA Airport. Worker training. We were going to get living wage. It was going to be worker retention, so if the companies left, that they would have to at least keep the workers for 90 days, and there was going to be a labor peace agreement. So we had these 5 planks. We're going to fight for this. We're going to go for it, and we're going to get it. The day before the hearing comes with city council, we're excited. The councilman's like, yeah, we're ready to do this. I got the people lined up. We're all ready to go. We're all excited the night before. Everybody's having a celebration, and we're like, yes, we're going to get this first big win. We get in the council the next day, and the councilman won't look us in the face.
Say that.
We had 25 people testify. The word got to us. There was a phone call made in the middle of the night to the councilman.
Yep.
Killed the deal. 2 things happened in that moment. I got really pissed off. The second thing happened in that moment that says, I'm going to build more freaking power in the city so that anytime I make a phone call in the middle of the night or anybody from my organization, we will get what we need in this city. So as a result of that, we got killed. They put a little memorandum of understanding, which had absolutely no power whatsoever in it, to try to appease us in this. And I'm like, do I look like I'm stupid? But I'm like, hey, you know what? All right, that's fine. We actually went back. The beauty of doing this as a faith-based community is that when it falls apart, you can draw on your resources of faith, right? And we went back, and folk were saying, well, look, it took 10 plagues to get the Israelites out of Egypt. So we're just on the first one. We're just on the first one. So anyway, it was right at the end. It was in June. We're going into the summer. Everybody's kind of discouraged. A couple weeks later, one of the councilmen calls us, was impressed with all the work that we had done, and said, look, I got an idea. Why don't you come in and talk to me about it? He says, you're never going to get the council to do this, especially when they're getting ready to come up on election season. I'm going to wrap this up. So he says, take it to the people. So we did a ballot initiative, which we got a first win, 17-0 vote. All of council members said, yeah, we should take this to the people. Let the people make the decision. It was really a coward's way out because they did not want to have to make the decision. And so when U.S. Airways lobbyists came to them, they're like, well, it's the people's choice. They get to make the decision. But here's what happened that was really powerful in the midst of all that. So we organized our congregations and the workers to work together. And over the course of a year, we reached out to 100,000 Philadelphians on this ballot initiative. We have folk putting stakes up on the front of their churches, vote yes on ballot initiative 1. We were doing all kinds of campaigns. We were using the voter activation network. We were part of the PA Voices network. And we had workers, for some of them for the first time, voting in their lives. And not only voting, they were talking to their family members who had never voted, sometimes 2 and 3 generations deep, about getting out to vote and make a difference. This is what really became very powerful in all this. So this is a 9-month campaign. We're out there they're working, the relationship gets tight. We have workers speaking and preaching in congregations on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday between the masjid and the Jewish synagogues and the Christian churches. We have workers coming in there, and they're having conversations with faith people that they thought really didn't care for them one way or the other. And as a result of this, over the course of that 9-month campaign, door knocking, phone banking, doing whatever we could, we finally got to Election Day. So a couple of things happened that were really powerful. First of all, people say ballot measures always win. That's not true. In this particular circumstance, there were 3 ballot initiatives that were up. The first ballot initiative won, the second ballot initiative lost, the third ballot initiative won. We won our ballot initiative with 76% of the electorate of Philadelphia saying that subcontracted workers should be able to get $10.80 an hour plus benefits. But the mayor was getting pissy because he knew we were going to win. So 2 weeks before the election, he preempts us, signs an executive order, trumps us, and pushes the wage up to $12 an hour. Now, he's all congratulatory and everything. The funny thing about it was that on the next day, the front page of all 3 newspapers in Philadelphia wasn't the mayor, it was Power and the workers that were standing there celebrating getting $12 an hour. So this is really good. So the other thing that happened was that we really concentrated when we were doing our voter work on the rising American electorate, in particular in Philadelphia, young black men and women, the ones that we spent all of our time talking to. As a residual impact of that, we raised the electorate in Philadelphia in that particular community by 4% over any other election that had occurred in the last 10 years. And so we were able to go back and look and say, not only are we building power to be able to affect these workers, but we also were able to build power to be able to affect electoral power, to be able to build out for people that they can now understand the power of their own vote. So it was very exciting to be able to do that, people to be able to own their own power, and we're continuing to build off of that as we move to $15 an hour now for the city of Philadelphia and many other things.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Deputy Vice. Mark, please.
Revved up now. So my name is Mark Meinster. I'm the executive director at Warehouse Workers for Justice. We organize warehouse workers in Chicago. We are not a black worker center, and I say that because I wanted to make 2 points. One is that we are a multiracial organization that has been deeply impacted by the Black Worker Center movement and challenged by black workers, by Black Lives Matter, in ways to change our work and develop our work. But I also say that because when much of our membership base and leadership base and staff are black workers. And early on, we got calls from funders about black worker organizing. And we felt it was very important to take the stand that money, there's so little resources going to black-led organizations, black EDs, and to this field, that it was really important for white-led and multiracial organizations not to define our work in that way, and certainly not to seek funding for that work. And I wanted to bring that up because the resource question came up. So in terms of our perspective and what we're doing, we have, well, let me take a step back a second. If you think about the last big worker upsurge in this country, it was in the 60s and 70s when public service workers engaged by the millions in illegal strikes. And they were illegal because at the time you couldn't bargain in the public sector. You certainly couldn't strike in many states in the public sector. And won the right to organize, won the right to collective bargaining. And this was a movement largely led by black workers that was happening in the context of a 20-year upsurge of the black liberation movement. And in many areas of the country, they were one and the same. But they won, and that completely changed collective bargaining forever in this country. Half of the labor movement is public sector workers now. That's directly as a result of that entire upsurge. So when we're talking about changing large sectors of the economy, these low-wage sectors, I think we have to realize that it takes some level of disruption. It takes some level of workers directly challenging capital, and that there's very few instances in industrialized economies where solely policy advocacy or solely workforce development or solely by the good-hearted corporations changing their behavior, that we've seen those types of changes. At a certain point, we need to identify areas of the economy where workers, and I would argue in particularly black workers, even though they may be super exploited, have the potential economic power to to challenge capital directly. And so that's what we're trying to do. One of the things we're trying to do at Warehouse Workers for Justice. In Chicago, Chicago is one of the distribution hubs of the world. There's about $1 trillion of goods that move through Chicago. It's the only place where all the major railroads meet in the entire hemisphere. There's about 120,000 warehouse workers that distribute these goods. And these are Asian imports that are mostly going to big box retailers like Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's. Now, those retailers, in large part, they buy they have their products manufactured at the same kind of complex of manufacturing facilities in southern China. Where they can compete is based on who can get those goods from China to the store shelves in New Jersey or Peoria, Illinois, as cheaply and as quickly and as efficiently as they possibly can. And so that means that these supply chains are incredibly important to the profitability of these companies. For instance, Walmart, they talk about themselves to their investors, they say, we're not a retail company, we're a logistics company, we're a supply chain company that just happens to have retail stores. And so, but what does it look like for the workers who are actually moving these products? 20 years ago, 25 years ago in Chicago, warehouse jobs were good jobs. They were highly unionized, living wage jobs, benefits, majority black workforce. We're talking about Sears Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, huge operations. And about 20 years ago, the industry moved out to the periphery, moved out to the suburbs where land was cheaper and where labor was cheaper, where you didn't have to pay as much taxes, there wasn't as much congestion and all that kind of stuff. And that had a tremendous impact on workers and on the employment structure. When they did that, they said, we're not going to employ people directly, we're going to have a layered employment structure. And so, and this was really one of the first areas of the economy where we started to see this kind of fissured workplace, or these layers of employment. So at a Walmart warehouse outside of Chicago, you have Walmart employees, you have 2 large logistics contractors that employ several hundred workers, and then you have 11 temp agencies below them. So there's 1,500 workers, but they're all working for different employers at different pay rates, but they're all doing the same job, all part of the same operation, all moving goods for Walmart. And of course, what that means is that you've had this massive explosion of temp employment. And so now 2/3 of all warehouse workers in Chicago are temps. It's about 80,000 workers. Increasingly, more and more of those temps are black workers. And it's now to the point where it's almost about 50%. And that is a relatively recent change, but every year the proportion of black temps in the warehouse industry has gone up and up and up. And just as an aside, warehousing and transportation has one of the biggest concentrations of black workers of any economic sector. There's about 1.5 million black logistics and transportation workers in the United States. The concentration is bigger than retail, it's bigger than healthcare. A quarter of all forklift operators in the United States are black. But increasingly, they're temps. And so what does that mean when you're a temp? Obviously, minimum wage, no benefits, we know all of that. It also means being shopped around every morning, showing up at the temp agency at 3 a.m. for a shift that might start at 7, getting on a van, and then being shopped around to 5 different warehouses, and each supervisor looks you up and down and decides whether you're going to work that day or whether you're going to go home. Literally shopping around black workers in these warehouses. And obviously that keeps workers vulnerable. It keeps workers from exercising their rights. And what we've seen is that the role, at least in our area, in this industry, that undocumented workers had historically played, or had played for the last 10, 15 years in this piece of the industry, that bottom rung is now being occupied by formerly incarcerated black workers. And so what you're seeing is criminal background checks are now really becoming a management strategy to depress wages. And so, we know the way that works. You've got again, one warehouse, everybody's moving the same freight, everybody's, got the same security clearance, they're all doing the same job, but you've got the direct hire employer over here making $15 an hour. The direct hire employer ostensibly does criminal background checks, although in reality, it's hit or miss. The temp employer doesn't do criminal background checks. They get $9 an hour. So it's not a question of whether you can do the job or whether you're qualified or whether your history might impact your current performance, because everybody's in the warehouse doing the same job. It's just a question of $6 an hour pay difference. And so again, that role is now being played by these workers. And so in terms of what we're doing about it, we've been focusing on the end user employer. In this case, we've been focusing in the last 3 years on Walmart. And we've been able to do strikes of workers. We've had a robust communication strategy, litigation strategy, and that's resulted in some real improvements. Wages have gone up 40% in the import piece of the Walmart supply chain. There are almost no temps left in those warehouses directly as a result of workers organizing. So that means workers have gone from, at the beginning of the campaign, many of our leaders were making $8.50 an hour, and now are making $15 to $20 an hour. So there's been a measurable improvement in terms of people's lives. But like I said before, we've been looking at our work. We're engaged in a process right now. We have a Black caucus within the organization who's leading a process to change our strategy to a more race-conscious organizing strategy. And so where that's gone is we're engaged in a campaign right now around these temp agencies, and in particular around the discriminatory use of these temp agencies. So we're trying to pass a bill in the Illinois Senate, SB 47, that would address this issue. We're doing a strategic litigation piece against the 10 largest temp agencies, and we're organizing in the four large retail supply chains right around the Chicago area. So, but the last point I just want to leave you with was that question of power, and that part of the strategy I think needs to be, not the whole strategy, but part of it needs to be identifying those areas of the economy where workers, even though there may not be that many of them, have tremendous power. We didn't win those things because we had a whole lot of workers behind us. It wasn't like Fight for 15 where we had 1 million workers out in the streets. We had in the dozens, really. But we were able to win because Walmart needed those goods moved. And so it shows you that there are these areas of the economy, and particularly where you see Black workers concentrated, where, if we're organizing smartly and allowing people to take leadership and building people's organizing capacity in those sectors, that people can challenge capital directly, and hopefully we can see that kind of upsurge that we saw in the public sector, in the 60s and 70s.
Great, thank you, Mark. Last but not least, our cover model, Jennifer Alexander.
I have never been called that before. Well, good afternoon, family.
Good afternoon.
All right, one more time. I know it's late. Good afternoon, family.
Good afternoon.
I know it's late, but I'm energized. So I'm Jennifer. I direct this group called Wisconsin Jobs Now, which is a proudly militant organization in the great state of Wisconsin. And I am a alumnus of BOLD, the Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity. The director, Denise, is here, as are actually many of the folks you all will read about in these reports. So we were taught this thing to express ourselves through feeling words. And so I am feeling powerful and tender. So I'm feeling powerful because I have spent the last couple of days with some of the most amazing Black leaders in the country talking about how we will reform criminal justice, how we will build power together, how we will build institution that gives us full ownership and dignity. I'm feeling powerful because, we shut down a freeway in Wisconsin and we got all the shaming that comes with taking direct action and refusing to let somebody else's definition of how you should respond to the crisis in your life determine your response. And so I just want folks to feel, don't let anybody tell you, like, so tell me again, Facebook, how the Baltimore uprising has no influence, right? On the day that charges are filed against 6 officers, right? So I'm feeling powerful. But I'm also feeling tender, and I'm feeling tender because this is a historic moment in my life being here with all of you. And I was telling Dorian earlier that I have spent the last 15 years of my life being the only in a room full of labor leaders at the strategy table. I've spent so long feeling these feelings that were expressed in this incredible report, and still I rise, and yet not having a sisterhood or a brotherhood to actually talk them out and understand them and analyze them. And so this is just a special moment for me. But I'm also feeling really tender because I am reminded, even as I am trying to be fully immersed and present in this conversation, that we are asking people to take real risks in their lives. And as Black labor leaders, we are often not given the real support, resources, and tools to protect them. So at this moment, my team back home is occupying a Chick-fil-A. And they are there because one of our workers in the Fight for 15, who went out on strike on April 15th, has been retaliated against. And it started with them cutting her hours, and then refusing to let her pick up extra shifts. And then just today, she came to work with her hair braided. And I want to just break down the math for you, because it costs about $200. If you got your cousin, maybe $80, right, for you to get your hair braided. And that is supposed to last you 3 to 4 months. That is an economic calculation about how you present professionally as a Black woman and make your budget. So she came to work with her hair braided in a color that many Black women use. It is a deep burgundy red. It is a beautiful and empowering and fiery color. And she was told she had to go home because only natural hair colors were allowed at Chick-fil-A. So she went home, she didn't cause a ruckus, and the first thing she did is she called her organizer and said, this is what's happening. And so then her organizer said, let's get the copy of your write-up. They will not provide it to her because we have a ULP hearing on Monday, and they won't give her a copy of the write-up. They told Ashanti that she could not come back to work until she took those braids out. So let's understand this for a second. You are a forced part-time worker because they won't give you access to full-time, making $7.25. You make an investment in your appearance because as Black women in the workforce, our hair and our bodies are regulated. And then only to be told that actually, I don't find you, your culture, and your appearance acceptable for my labor force. So that is why I'm tender, because while I know that we are going to do everything we can do to fight this injustice for her, I know there will be another microaggression against her body that we will have to stand with her. And I don't know if we will have the capacity to fully protect her the way we should. So one thing I want to ask really quickly is that Lisa, my communications director, is right here. We are going to be working with Color of Change to get out a petition against Chick-fil-A as soon as possible. If you have a large list, if you could connect with her so she can email you when it's ready and you can help amplify this, I would really appreciate it. So let me talk a little bit about the Wisconsin context, because I think it's worthwhile to ground this idea of Black organizing in Wisconsin. And I know some of you are going, wait, what? There are Black people in Wisconsin? Like, why there? But this is real life for us. Wisconsin actually has the highest incarceration rate for Black men in the country. We have one of the highest joblessness rates. In Milwaukee, we have over a 55% joblessness rate for Black men. We have the largest rate, the highest rate of residential segregation, not just based on race, but also by income. And we have, it's not really the honor, but we have the distinction of being named the worst state of America for Black families last year. And we have a governor who thinks he's going to be president. So I want to ground the work that we're doing in that context, because many people would look at me and say, well, why don't you just move? You are not stuck there. There's no reason for you to be in a state where that is what your children are dealing with. But I also know that I was raised to believe in this state where progressive power was built, that gave this country Social Security and Medicaid and these workman's compensation and all of these incredible programs that built our middle class, that allowed generations of white families like my grandmother and my grandfather, who were German Catholic immigrants, to build a decent life for their families. And so I believe in a Wisconsin where if we ground our work in the leadership and the dignity and the experience of black workers, we can once again build that type of economy, but one that doesn't skip over a crowd. And I feel like I should say this, in the 1970s, and you'll read this in Mark's report, in the 1970s, Wisconsin was actually the best place for black workers. We had, our average income for black workers was 19% higher than the median income in the rest of the country. So we have almost seen a complete reversal of that power. So again, WJN, we are a hybrid community and labor organization, and we are the only group in our state that dedicates our resources to the field. So we run a daily field program both in workplaces and in neighborhoods in our state, and we are not an organization that would say we're a black organizing organization. We organize black folks in black communities to build black power, and we organize rural white folks in rural white communities to build an economy for everyone, to utilize this power that comes from direct action. It's an incredible responsibility in a state that is 93% white to center your work in black dignity and leadership. And you know, I just want to reflect on the fact that the organizations up here are all really young. My organization is also only 4 years old, I suppose I'll say. And we were not a black-led organization a year and a half ago. In fact, even though we're a statewide organization, 85% of our members are black folks in Milwaukee. And we had a majority white staff and a management team that was all white when I came on as executive director. So I say to listen to that response in the report that it is not a leadership development issue, but a leadership opportunity issue within black organizing and black worker organizing. And one of the first things I did as an analysis of my own power, which was not that much, I came to find out quickly, but of the transformational changes that we needed to make in our organization. And in just a year and a half, we now have 80% black staff. 100% of our organizing department were members or activists with us before they came on staff, and our management team is now 40% black. And that is not by accident, but by making really tough decisions about the types of leadership and the types of attributes we needed in order to become the strongest organization we could become. So let me just close with these things. Black research matters. Black research matters. We are having these conversations because somebody felt they took the narrative and the anecdotes that we were all experiencing and decided it deserved more attention. Black infrastructure matters. And I want to lift up Sister Lola, who said yesterday in one of our meetings, she said, if this isn't about building independent black organization that doesn't need a gatekeeper to come through the room, that doesn't need a conduit to pass through their money, but that can stand in their full power, then that's not what I'm here for. So black infrastructure matters. Black strategy matters. And a strategy that doesn't just view blackness as a monolithic idea, but that talks about how do we organize the black moneyed elite. Ooh. That talks about where black women, black queer folks, black trans folks fit within this broader narrative. That black youth matter. The folks who have changed the narrative about this economy, the folks who have taken the biggest risks, are young black folks in that fight for 15. Those are the folks who have changed our entire conversation in our country. So black youth matter. Black resources matter. And not just resources and dollars, although those matter too, but resources in terms of having the time, energy, and capacity to not have to do it all the time. Allies to Black folks matter. White-led organizations, white folks who are allies, that meme that's going around Facebook, that silence, white silence is consent, it means something real to me as the daughter of a white mother. White allyship matters. Elections, Bishop, matter. Black folks' full participation and ownership of their neighborhoods and their communities matters. And having organizations that can take that full participation on matter. So the Working Families Organization, I am so glad and so honored that you are sitting right there. We are building a Working Families Party in Wisconsin, but we are gonna do it the Wisconsin way. And so we are gonna center that in what we are trying to build, which is a city council. Even though we are a majority Black city, we have a city council that doesn't represent the interests of Black folks. So when we build a Working Families Party organization in Wisconsin, it's gonna be centered on identifying and lifting up Black leadership. And that doesn't mean another lawyer who can run, right? It means the leaders in our Fight for 15 who have been in the streets and in the work for 2.5 years, we are gonna make sure they're ready to run for offices in their neighborhoods. We're gonna get rid of that myth that you have to be quote unquote qualified and allowing somebody else to define what is qualified for us. Black organizing matters. So let me end with this. A couple of my truths. Truth number one. You cannot build worker power or progressive power if we are simply asking people to stand up to become less poor. So a bold vision matters.
That's right.
Our work is incredibly valuable labor. Domestic work, you saw that, 87% of GDP, right? Right, the fast food and retail industry, some of the most profitable corporations in the world. Do not let anybody tell you that there is not dignity in serving other people, that there is not value in serving other people. There is an incredible value to the tune of trillions of dollars. But we are not getting the full share of our participation in this labor market, and that is what matters. And lastly, what matters is that we believe at our core that we are worth more, that we know how valuable we are, that we stop limiting ourselves by what others would have us believe is possible, and instead we fight tooth and nail, literally neighborhood by neighborhood, store by store, person by person, for what we deserve, for our full potential, for the full value of our labor, and for the dignity and respect our communities deserve. Thank you. And I didn't cry, look at that. I did not cry.
Okay, so we're going to come right out to you. We have about 10, 15 minutes left. So I'll take a round of 3 or 4 questions, comments. Please try to be succinct, concise, so that we can get as many people in as possible.
Ronnie Galvin from the Center for Community Change. Bishop, I thought you were going to preach there for a second. On that note, I wish I could get a conversation going, Bishop, between you and Sean Thomas, because I thought I heard Sean saying that we de-racialize our messaging for practical and pragmatic reasons. And at the center, we've done a lot of research, as Sean alluded to, around that. But there's something about that as the sister said here, makes me feel a little tender, gets me in my feelings when we make that kind of move for the pragmatic sake. And I'm wondering, Bishop, what the prophetic has to say when the pragmatic is in the public square.
Okay, let's go like a couple more. And D'Angelo, do you wanna get on the queue to to that question? Yes, I'm looking right at you, D'Angelo. Do you want to get on the queue to respond to Ronnie's comment? Would you give him the microphone, please, Shea? Well, I just want you to respond to the campaign that your campaign that Sean raised, and can you talk to us a little bit about the trade-offs in your campaign?
So with our Ban the Box campaign, we had a strategy of engaging voters throughout the state, because it was a statewide bill, in order to have them either sign postcards or make calls to their legislators in order to get them to vote for the bill. As we began to contact folks in rural and suburban and other parts of the state that weren't black, as we began to talk to them about the message was more around just the racialization of our criminal justice system, and as a way to kind of set us up to win bigger victories down the road. Ban the Box was just the first step. As we began talking to people about that, it wasn't well receptive, to say the least. People would hang up on us as soon as they heard like Worker Center for Racial Justice. And so we just made a strategic decision, like, do we want to win the campaign now around Ban the Box, or do we want to sacrifice a victory and keep having conversations with people and maybe get a larger victory down the road? And just, it was a mistake, but we made a strategic decision to, scale back our message, not talk about race in the criminal justice system, and just talk about the second chance opportunities for folks and how everyone deserves a second chance, and economy and all this other stuff that had nothing to do with race. And so, and that's, it allowed us to win this Ban the Box victory, but it didn't set us up for larger, more transformative victories down the road.
Yeah.
So, I want to say that, as a Christian, I believe in calling out the demons when I see them. Part of the problem, and I heard a conversation from the earlier panels were talking about, being progressive, the whole 9 yards. There are two things that kill me about the progressive movement, right? One, they totally disregard faith, and I'm going to keep putting that out there, right? And you can't get black folk without talking to faith community. I'm sorry, you just can't do it. The second thing that they do is that they're afraid of race. And part of it is that many progressives still haven't dealt with their own implicit bias and notion of privilege. And so every time you start having a conversation about race, they start to get a little antsy, like, well, we don't want to talk about race, we can't do that. No, we have to talk about race. The conservative movement talks about race every damn day.
Every day.
Every damn day. They don't call it race. They'll say those welfare queens are out there doing this thing. Those young bucks out there, using Medicaid money. Using whatever. There's dog whistle politics that that Dr. Lopez talks about, right? Is being used every day. And the problem is that until we own race, take back the narrative, flip it, and turn it on its head, we are going to consistently get beat. So we've gotten to the place we just tell people up front, we're a race and economic justice organization. We don't separate race and economic justice. You can't have one without the other. And so we really press in that. As a matter of fact, just a quick, we actually are doing an education justice campaign, just turned our state upside down because we did a study. Nobody thought, because we're faith people, they don't think we do studies. We did a study that just showed that there's a disparity in how the state of Pennsylvania funds black districts versus white districts. That there's an $1,800 a year per student difference between white districts, majority white districts, and majority districts of color, right? It's when we start doing stuff like that, and then we call it out, and then we got white folks talking about, oh, that was unintended consequences. Doesn't make a difference, unintended. Address it and do something about it. So I think it's incredibly important that even when we're dealing with our progressive partners and foundations and others, that we've got to be explicit about race and just put it out on the table. Yes, will you lose some grants? Absolutely. Will you lose some allies? Absolutely. But if we're really about transforming our communities, then we have to be true to ourselves and make sure we speak our truth, not only to power, but we have to speak our truth to ourselves at the same time. So, thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I was wondering when we were going to have church.
Right.
Thank you, Bishop.
Give me 2 more seconds. Huh?
Other comments, questions, reflections?
Hello, my name's Andrew. I had a question for, I guess, the whole panel. It seems like a lot of the regional work each of you are doing with your groups is making up for like the lack of full employment policies at the federal level. And that seems like a different issue from really exercising power on the job or building institutions that would do like collective bargaining or something. So I was wondering if I could hear the ideas from the various members of the panel on strategies for balancing those two goals.
Okay, we're going to get a couple of others in. Who else? Anybody on this side? Everyone shy all of a sudden? Thank you, Carol.
Hi, my name's Carol Joyner. I'm with the Labor Project for Working Families, and I had a couple. First, I want to thank you for your excellent comments, everyone here, and the beautiful reports, and just it's been a really rich day. So I'm going home back to DC pretty full. But two comments that I had in terms of 2 years ago, at the last AFL-CIO convention, they had all these amazing resolutions. And you know, typical to the resolutions, a lot of them you don't really see the reality of those resolutions. And one of them was increasing the participation of people of color in leadership at the AFL-CIO and all of its affiliates and in labor in general. And so I know that many of you work in relationship to unions, come out of the labor movement, and I'm trying to figure out what exactly needs to happen for that resolution to come to fruition. You know, I just see it all of my work in DC, and historically at my work at 1199. 1199, of course, is not really an example, but throughout the rest of the labor movement, where the leadership is still, no matter what happens, predominantly white and male. And even as it ages, you know, you don't see the transition happening and the space being created. So that's one question. The other question has more to do with what, you know, the positive news we got out of Baltimore today, so I want to lift that up, but also thinking, I'm constantly concerned about us shifting to an economic justice conversation, which really should be talking about the inherent racism in policing. And I don't know, because I know historically middle-class black communities were being, you know, people were being hung and lynched forever, and they had, you know, they had decent jobs, or their communities were intact. And I don't know that economic security is necessarily a solution to ending racial profiling and attacking people. And are we, in some ways, not owning the real problem, having this conversation about, well, if we fix our communities, we'll do something about the attack on black men and boys and women inside of our own communities. And so I know that, Lola, you made a comment about that, and so I was wondering if, for me, if you didn't shift too quickly to economic solutions in order to deal with what's happening in our community to our brothers in those communities. And so maybe if you could start by responding to that, and how we talk about both, because both needs to happen.
That's right.
But this whole society shifts to the economic conversation immediately. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't be much more focused and unapologetically focused on the racial issues inside of, you know, inherent in policing in the United States. Sorry it's so long.
No, I
Thank you,
appreciate.
Carol. And we'll let the panel answer any and all of those questions. So do you want to?
So, I mean, I really fundamentally believe that even if we fix the policing issues, the level of poverty and the lack of opportunity for young black men would only create another space by which they would be dehumanized, targeted, and funneled into some level of other physical and brutal violence. I certainly think the movement around Black Lives Matters, and we had members, you know, who went to Ferguson. We did 2 van rides, 60 hours there and back, participated in Occupy LAPD, because fundamentally the root cause is the institutionalized racism that allows the severe, deadly profiling of young black men, and to the extent that they can't be safe in their own skins, in their own block, in their own neighborhoods. It's the same institutionalized racism that prevents them from having access to quality work and falling into the economic violence and trap of being excluded from work and not being able to support themselves, support their families, and live a full life. And so I don't think we can pit. We need to focus on community we need to focus on policing, we need to focus on, the issue of police accountability and the treatment of Black men, and ignore the issue of poverty that is helping to fuel this level of dehumanization, the control of the state of our neighborhoods versus our control of the neighborhoods, the inability for us to participate in the hiring of sheriffs and demanding oversight boards, that the reason why our community is not fully and deeply engaged in the democratic process that builds the power that holds police and their bosses, the mayor, and the businesses accountable, is because we are in a scratching and survival mode that doesn't give us the luxury of being a full citizen in this country. And so I think that, from our members' perspective, if we aren't addressing that and making that as much of a priority as saying we need special prosecutors, we need body cameras, we need to disinvest money from police departments, if we aren't addressing the core issues of poverty in our communities, which were part of the same issues of lynching, the same ways in which our men were lynched, over 50 years ago, the modern day example, still the root causes, poverty that we are experiencing since emancipation. So for us, it is an economic justice issue. It is a social justice issue, and the two have to be linked and addressed. And corporations, unions, we all have a role to play in addressing what's happening in the community. So I will end there. I think I want to add on terms of the union leadership piece, coming out of unions, being a union organizer, then founding the Black Worker Center, it goes back to power. The unions that have fair and equitable representation are the unions where the members demand fair and equitable representation. We've done so much to dismantle leadership development, access. We've done so much to marginalize Black voices and not participate in building leadership of members to be able to challenge and to run for office. And that's one of the things we do. We're building caucuses in the Black Worker Center for union members. We're helping to educate construction workers on how to navigate their union hall, how to engage in the politics of their union, because that's the only way we're going to change that, is from the bottom up.
So I think just to sort of add around policing, we need to recognize that the police state emerged from organized militias whose primary responsibility was to go find, trap, and bring back runaway, escaped, enslaved people. Mm-hmm. That's where the modern idea of police forces emerged from, right? The police state is a function of capitalism set to determine Black people's bodies, their labor, and the protection of property. It is why people lose their mind when we attack a store, right? Because the whole function of the system is to protect capitalism. And we just gotta be real about that, right? Like, militarized police forces, tanks in urban cities, that's not just about protecting the folks on those streets. Somebody made a hell of a lot of money building those tanks, right? And that money didn't come back to our communities, right? Somebody is making a lot of money off of these guns. Private prisons, highly profitable industries. You want to know why? They are the only industries that before you actually sign a contract with the provider, you have to guarantee the number of people who will fill them. Think on that for a second. Right? So that is why economics is inextricably linked to this police state, right? And I just want to lift up that we have two brothers who are leading the movement for Black Lives in Wisconsin, both in Madison and Milwaukee, that are here. They've been with us all weekend. And there was a lot of tension. In fact, I remember right after things happened and we were going out on the street, we were doing hashtags, WJN was doing hashtags, Black Lives Matter, Black Wages Matter, right? And we took a lot of heat. We took a lot of heat for that, right? So I'm glad to see the name of the report now. I got, we got the proper licensing. But those brothers stood up, right, and joined with us because they understood that the same workers who are working in fast food restaurants are the same people who are being targeted for mass incarceration and dealing with that on a daily life. They understood that Mike Brown was shot outside of a McDonald's in Ferguson that was one of the hottest stores for the Fight for 15, and many of the leaders that initially were in the streets were the folks who have been out on strike learning to build their own power over the last year and a half. So these things, I don't want to say, I'm a whole person. I am a militant, radical, black, queer woman. Like, I'm a whole person. And I want to be able to talk about all of my liberation, not just a piece of it that folks feel like is the right way to go. And I think that when we see the most power and we see the best leadership, it's when we allow the space, the access, and the opportunity for people to organize themselves in that way.
Yeah, one of the things, thank you.
And you're not the only preacher, clearly, on the panel.
Absolutely not. And I will go to her church any day of the week. Any day of the week. One of the things that I think so the enemy that we're fighting is very good at getting us to go into silos and pitting our crumbs against one another's crumbs, right? And I think part of the challenge that we have is really getting collectively together and doing an upstream analysis about who we're fighting against, and that we recognize that when we're fighting against mass incarceration, when we're fighting against low-wage work, when we're fighting against racial justice, when we're fighting against education justice, as we're doing, which is the link between the school-to-prison pipeline, you defund schools in ethnic areas, and then you put more money in prisons in states and white communities so they have jobs out there, but you take the jobs out of the African American communities across the state. You begin to realize that, wait a minute, the same forces that we're fighting on any one of these is the same force for all of these. And that part of, one of the things even we had to do with power is we have separate strategy teams. So education justice got a team, there's economic dignity strategy team, there's there's the sort of mass incarceration racial justice team, and we've had separate teams. And I said, wait a minute, we're not doing that anymore. I said, we're fighting the same groups. I said, it does not make sense to de-link and separate and diffuse our power. It's one enemy that we're fighting, and we've got to keep all these things together. But it also becomes the same thing with the various organizations in our community, right? So we got an organization for this over here, got an organization for this over there, got an organization for this over there. We're fighting with each other over money from the same foundations and funders that are out there, right? We're fighting with the black entrepreneurs out there that we can get some money from. Most of them don't want to give us money because they don't want it on their tax return. But the reality is that we're pitted against each other on a consistent basis. How do we find ways to link together, walk together, march together, fight together, organize together to be able to create the change that we need to see in our communities, so that even though your fight is not the same as my fight, the enemy is the same, and so we build power together and fight that fight together. So I think that's part of the challenge. Even when we talk about the unions, you talk about voting in the community, we need to get the black workers to vote in their unions. If they would vote in their unions, they would get black leadership, that would really be able to transform a lot of what's going on. So I'm going to stop right there.
And I'm going to stop right there because it is 4:02, and I'm sure for those of you that have questions, you can attack the panelists after the panel. Let me first thank the panel for a fantastic discussion. Kim Freeman, will you stand up, please? Sharon Harris, will you stand up, please? I want to, in particular, thank... Yes, Sharon, stand up. Yes, stand up. Sharon has organized this conference and brought us all here. I want to thank Kim for her work. I want to thank Sharon for her work. I want to thank Shea for her work with helping with this conference. And last but not least, two other people, Susan Weefald, of course, from Discount. And Mark Bayard, who I will bring back up to the microphone to close us out.
So I know it's a little bit past 4 o'clock, so I'm going to be very brief. I want to thank everyone for coming to the conference. It has been a phenomenal day of discussions and ideas. I truly encourage everyone to read these reports fully. The amount of time, effort, energy, and information that is in these reports, I don't think can be found in any other places. So I think that's a very important point that I want folks to know. I want to thank Dorian so much for really mobilizing the resources of Columbia University to support us in this effort. It's phenomenal that we were able to do this conference here like a week or two before graduation, so space was really tough, and this was really tough to pull off. And I want to thank all the folks who worked on this. My colleague Kim Freeman Brown has been phenomenal in terms of helping me and being the amazing lead writer in the And Still I Rise report. And I don't have too much more to say, but to again thank everyone for coming to this conference. This is this is an ongoing conversation. The time of this conversation, again, when we envisioned it, we didn't realize that it'd be in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. But we are so happy to be a part of the conversation. We are very excited to be trying to bring the economic justice component into this conversation, working hand in hand with our colleagues in the Black Lives Matter movement. And like the Bishop was saying, our goal is definitely not to separate these issues, because silos do none of us any good. But I think it was important to put a focus and an emphasis on black worker issues today, on May Day, because that is such a critical thing that you cannot hear in mainstream media. So again, thank everyone for coming. Look forward to talking to you all. All of these reports are available online. All of these organizations, or the vast majority of these organizations, have websites. So please stay in contact with us. This is not simply an activity for a one-off activity. We really do want to maintain the dialogue between these larger scale conferences. We want to have regional dialogue around this stuff. The Discount Foundation is going to continue to work on these issues with other foundations in this room, and this is definitely an ongoing conversation. So thank you very much.